My mother-in-law spent 9 years tearing me apart in private, calling my miscarriage an inconvenience while playing the sweetest saint alive. What I told her made her jaw drop. My mother-in-law Loretta has been on her third husband for 2 years and her third personality for about as long. The woman she performs in public has never existed in private, not once in the 9 years I've known her. In public, Loretta touches your arm when she talks to you. She remembers every birthday. She brings casseroles when neighbors are sick. She volunteers at the church food pantry every other Saturday and makes absolutely sure everyone within earshot knows about it. She is warm and generous and thoughtful, and none of it is real. In private, Loretta told me the week before my wedding that my dress made me look like I was trying too hard and that her son could have done better. She said it while zipping me up. She told me at my first Christmas dinner with the family that the gravy I made tasted like hospital food. And then when my husband walked back in, she smiled and said everything was delicious. She called me 3 days after my miscarriage and asked when we were going to try again because she wasn't getting any younger and wanted grandchildren while she could still enjoy them. She has told me I'm too sensitive, too loud, too opinionated, too much of everything she doesn't want anywhere near her son. And she has said every single one of these things when nobody else was in the room to hear it. The moment another person walks in, Loretta becomes someone else entirely. She puts her hand on my back and calls me sweetheart and tells people how lucky she is to have me in the family. 9 years I have spent watching this woman perform kindness for audiences who believe every word. 9 years of my husband saying I know she's difficult, but that's just how she is. 9 years of swallowing things I should have said out loud the very first time she opened her mouth. Her third husband is Philip. Good man, has absolutely no idea what he married. Loretta met him at church because church is her favorite stage. Philip thinks she is kind and gentle and selfless. He has never been alone in a room with Loretta and someone she considers beneath her. The night it happened, Loretta and Philip hosted a small dinner at their house. My husband and I, Loretta's sister Gwen, and 2 couples from her church group, 8 people around the table. Loretta spent the evening performing. She touched arms. She refilled glasses before anyone had to ask. She complimented Gwen's earrings 3 separate times. She told one of the church women her potato salad was the best she'd ever tasted, which she says to every person who brings food to anything ever. At one point, while the guests were in the living room, Loretta and I ended up alone at the counter. I was rinsing a serving dish. She walked up and said quietly that I should smile more because I was making Philip's friends uncomfortable with my attitude. I hadn't said a single negative thing all evening. I'd been pleasant and polite and completely silent about the fact that this woman had called me a bad mother 6 weeks earlier during a phone call where she didn't know I was in the next room listening. I put the dish down. I walked into the dining room where Philip was sitting with his coffee. Loretta followed because she always follows when something is about to go off script. I looked at her in front of Philip and said it. I told her she was fake. I told her she was phony. I said after everything you've done, how are you standing here pretending to be kind when we both know exactly what you are? Philip put his cup down. Loretta's face flickered. For half a second, the mask slipped and something cold moved behind her eyes. Then she tilted her head and said, "Oh, darling, I don't even know what you're talking about." I told her she was a narcissist. I used the word directly and clearly to her face. She blinked and said, "Oh, darling, I don't even know what that is." I told her, "Yes, you do, because you've been called it many times by many different people." She didn't say a single word after that, not one. Gwen had walked in from the living room mid-conversation and was standing in the doorway watching. She didn't defend Loretta. I picked up my purse and left the house. My husband stayed behind because that's what he always does. Within 20 minutes, Loretta was on the phone with him doing what she always does, crying without tears, performing devastation, saying she had absolutely no idea why I would say something so cruel and that she had only ever tried to love me. My husband came home and told me his mother was upset. I asked if she cried. He said yes. I asked if he saw actual tears on her face. He went quiet for a long time. That was the first crack. Gwen called 2 days later, not to scold me. She called to tell me Loretta had done the exact same thing to Philip's daughter from his first marriage. The daughter stopped coming to family events 6 months ago, and nobody understood why until Gwen heard what I said in that dining room. Gwen also told me Loretta's second husband's family had cut her off completely and that his sister had used the exact same word, narcissist. Said it to Loretta's face at a family event 4 years before I ever came along. Loretta told everyone that woman was unstable. Gwen believed it then. She doesn't believe it anymore. Philip's daughter called me the following week. Her name is Brooke. She said the first time Loretta ever got her alone was the day she brought a birthday gift over for Philip. Philip stepped out to grab something, and the second he was gone, Loretta turned to her and said, "Your father doesn't need you showing up and reminding him of his failed marriage. It makes him sad." Just like that. No build-up, no warning. Brooke told me she just stood there holding the gift bag and didn't know what to say. She was 19 years old, and this grown woman looked her in the face and told her that her own dad didn't want her around. Brooke said she went home that night and cried for hours and never told anyone because Loretta made her believe that bringing it up to Philip would only hurt him. So Brooke just stopped showing up. She skipped Thanksgiving that year, then Christmas, then every holiday after that. She pulled away from her own father because Loretta made her think she was doing him a favor by disappearing. I asked what Philip thought happened. Brooke got quiet for a second and then said, "She told him I just got busy with my own life." He believed her because he always believes her. That hit me hard. Loretta didn't just push people away. She rewrote the story so nobody ever questioned where they went. She made Philip think his own daughter just drifted off, and he never knew the real reason because Loretta made sure he wouldn't. I called Gwen the next day. She said, "I've watched my sister do this to every person who threatens her position. She did it to our mother's caregiver. She did it to her second husband's sister. She does it to anyone she can't control." I asked why she never said anything. Gwen said, "Nobody believes you when you go against Loretta. She makes you look like the problem." I understood that completely because that was exactly what had happened to me for 9 years. Loretta had built herself a wall of people who thought she was wonderful, and anyone who tried to say different got painted as crazy or jealous or ungrateful. That night I told Vernon everything. About Brooke, about what Loretta said to her when she was 19, about how Brooke stopped coming to holidays because Loretta told her she was making Philip sad just by being there, about Gwen, about the caregiver, about the second husband's sister, about the pattern that stretched back years before I ever showed up. Vernon sat on the edge of the bed and didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet and then said, "You're asking me to believe my mother has been lying to everyone for years." I looked right at him and said, "I'm asking you to believe your wife." He said he needed time. Then I texted Brooke and told her about the dinner Loretta was hosting in 2 weeks. Asked if she'd be willing to come. She texted back in under a minute. "I'll be there." I texted Gwen the same question. An hour went by, then another. Then her message came through. "It's time." 3 women who had been silenced by the same person were finally going to be in the same room at the same time, and Loretta had no idea any of us had even spoken. I gave Vernon one more chance. I sat him down and told him exactly what I was planning. I said, "You can stand with me or you can stand with her, but you can't stand in the middle anymore." He looked at me like I'd asked him to choose between breathing and eating. 3 days before the dinner, Vernon came home with a message from his mother. She wanted a private conversation before Saturday, to clear the air. She'd been praying about it. Of course she wanted to get me alone. That's how she operates. She corners you where nobody can hear, resets the story, and by the time you're in front of other people, the narrative has already been rewritten, and you're the one who looks unreasonable. I told Vernon no. He said, if you won't even talk to her, how is this supposed to get better? I said, 9 years of talking to her privately is exactly why we're here. I'm done having conversations nobody else can hear. 2 days before the dinner, I was home alone when there was a knock at the door. Loretta, nice blouse, hair done, holding a small gift bag with tissue paper sticking out the top. That smile on. I opened the door. She held out the bag and said, I just wanted to bring you something and talk for a minute, just us girls. I didn't take the bag. I didn't step aside. I said, whatever you have to say to me, you can say on Saturday in front of everyone. Something changed in her face. Fast. Her smile stayed, but her jaw tightened and something moved behind her eyes. Something flat and real. Then she leaned in close and dropped her voice so low I could barely hear it and said, you're making a mistake. I have been patient with you for years, but if you embarrass me in front of my husband, I will make sure Vernon sees exactly who you really are. She held my eyes long enough to make sure I understood it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Then she straightened up and said in her normal voice, well, I hope you enjoy the candle, sweetheart. She set the bag on the porch railing, turned around, and walked to her car like she had just delivered a casserole to a sick neighbor. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't scared. But something was new this time, because for the first time, Loretta had said something that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't say, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, if you embarrass me. She told me to my face that the mask was something she was choosing to wear. She had never admitted that before. I called Brooke. She came to my house and threatened me. Saturday can't come fast enough. Brooke said, good. Now you know for sure she's scared. I called Gwen that night and told her. She went quiet and then said, she said something almost identical to our mother's caregiver before she got her fired. Same script, different decade. The night before the dinner, Vernon sat me down and said he had watched his mother cry again and still hadn't seen any tears. It wasn't him saying he believed me, but it was the first time in 9 years he had said out loud that something about his mother didn't add up. I said, you don't have to do anything tomorrow. Just watch. That's all I'm asking. He gave me a small nod, and for the first time in so long, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a while. Hope. I woke up the next morning to Vernon already on the phone in the other room. I heard him say, I know, Mom. I'll talk to her. He looked at me when I walked out and said she was worried about tonight and maybe we should just keep things calm. Every bit of hope I had gone to bed with was gone. Less than 12 hours ago, this man told me he watched his mother fake cry and it didn't sit right with him. One phone call. She called him early on purpose. She always does. She gets to him before the truth has time to settle. I said, she called you this morning to get you back on her side and it took her less than 10 minutes. He said that wasn't what happened. I said, that is exactly what happened. And the fact that you can't see it is why I stopped waiting for you to protect me. Vernon didn't ride with me to the dinner. He took his own car. He needed his own exit plan. I drove to Loretta's house alone. Sat in the driveway for a minute looking at the front of that house. The porch light on. Flowers in the window boxes. The soft blue door. Everything warm and welcoming on the outside. And I felt the familiar sick feeling of knowing exactly what happened inside when nobody was watching. I wasn't nervous. I was tired. So deeply tired of being the only person in the room willing to say what everyone else could see but wouldn't name. But tonight, I wouldn't be the only one. Loretta opened the door before I could knock. Hair done. Makeup soft. That smile. She said, there she is. Come in, sweetheart. I smiled right back. Wouldn't miss it. Gwen was already seated at the table. Brooke walked in 10 minutes later and I watched Loretta's face when she saw her stepdaughter come through the door. The smile didn't drop, but it froze. She hadn't expected Brooke. Dinner started and Loretta was in her element. Moving around that table, touching arms, refilling glasses, asking about people's kids by name, laughing at jokes that weren't even funny. She made her way to where Brooke was sitting and put her hand on her shoulder and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, we've missed you so much, sweetheart. Brooke gave a tight smile and said nothing. Just picked up her fork and moved a piece of bread around her plate. The two church couples loved Loretta. Genuinely, honestly, deeply. You could see it on their faces every time she said something kind. They had built an image of her solid as concrete, and I was realizing breaking through it was going to be harder than I thought. These weren't bad people. They were just people who had only ever seen one side of a woman who had spent her entire life making sure that's all anyone ever saw. Loretta steered the conversation to family. She put her hand on Philip's arm and said, I'm just so blessed to have all of you here. Family is everything to me. Philip looked at her like she had hung the moon. He had absolutely no idea that the woman sitting next to him had told his own daughter that her presence made him sad. I looked across the table at Gwen. I needed to see she was still with me. She was staring at her plate, picking at her food, looking pale. Finally, our eyes met and she gave me a tiny shake of her head. So small, nobody else at the table would have noticed. But I noticed. I slid my phone out under the table and texted her. Are you still with me? I watched her purse light up. She didn't reach for it. Without Gwen, it was just me and Brooke. A daughter-in-law with a grudge and a stepdaughter who stopped showing up. Loretta could absolutely spin that into two difficult women ganging up on her. Then Loretta stood up with her wine glass and said she had something she wanted to say. The table went quiet. She talked about forgiveness, about how life is too short to hold on to anger, about how the people we love sometimes say things they don't mean, and how it's our job to show them grace even when it hurts. She was looking at me the entire time with an expression of gentle sadness, like I was someone she felt sorry for, someone who had hurt her deeply, and she was choosing to rise above it. She said, I believe in grace. I believe that even when people say hurtful things, we should respond with love. One of the church women put her hand over her heart. Loretta was rewriting what happened at the last dinner, right here, right now, in front of witnesses. If I let her finish this speech, it was over. The narrative would be sealed and I would be buried under it. I looked at Brooke. Her eyes were steady and clear and she gave me the smallest nod. She was ready. She had been ready for years. I stood up. Loretta stopped talking. The room went so quiet I could hear a glass being set down on the table. I said, Loretta just gave a beautiful speech about forgiveness and grace, and I think everyone here should know what she's actually asking to be forgiven for. Loretta let out a small laugh and waved her hand and said, oh honey, this isn't the time or place. The same line, the same move. Every time I had ever tried to say what she did to me out loud, it's not the time, it's not the place. Say it later, in private, where I can deny it ever happened. I said, it's never the time or place with you, because you only say things when nobody else can hear them. That stops tonight. I turned away from Loretta and looked at Philip, just Philip. I said, your wife told me the week before my wedding that my dress made me look like I was trying too hard, and that your stepson could have done better. She said it while zipping me up. She told me my gravy tasted like hospital food, and then smiled when Vernon walked back in and said it was delicious. She called me 3 days after I lost a pregnancy, and asked when we were going to try again because she wasn't getting any younger. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound, Philip's face went completely still. He turned slowly and looked at Loretta. She was standing there with her wine glass still in her hand and her mouth open and nothing coming out. No denial, no laugh, no "oh darling, I don't know what you're talking about." For the first time in 9 years, I watched her reach for a script and find nothing there. Then Brooke stood up. She was shaking. I could see it in her hands, but her voice was solid when she spoke. She said, "She did it to me too." The table went completely silent. Not polite quiet, the kind of silent where you can feel the air in the room change, where every person at that table understood at the same moment that something much bigger than a family disagreement was happening. Brooke looked at Philip, her dad. "The reason I stopped coming to holidays is because she told me that me being here reminded you of your failed marriage, and that it made you sad. She said it to my face when you were in the other room. I was 19. I believed her." Philip's eyes went red, not sad. The kind of red that comes from something cracking open inside you that had been holding steady for years. He turned to Loretta. His voice was rough. "Tell me she's lying." Loretta's chin came up. "She's twisting things. You know how emotional she gets." And something in Philip's face changed. He said slowly, "That is the exact thing you said about her when she stopped coming around. Those are the exact words." Like he was hearing his own memory play back and matching it to what Brooke just said, and realizing the two things fit together so perfectly, there was only one explanation. The same script, word for word. Then Gwen spoke. She stayed in her chair with her hands flat on the table, and her voice was so steady it almost sounded rehearsed, but I knew it wasn't. It was the voice of a woman who had been carrying this for decades and finally decided to put it down. "I've known my sister my entire life, and I have watched her do this to every person who gets close enough to see the real her. She did it to your second husband's family. His sister called her a narcissist to her face years before any of us used that word. Loretta told everyone that woman was unstable. I believed it. I don't anymore." Loretta turned to Gwen, and everything about her face changed. The softness gone, the warmth gone. The gentle church volunteer mask fell away, and what was underneath was something I had only ever seen in glimpses. Something flat, something cold, something that had been hiding behind that smile so long most people didn't know it existed. She said quietly, "You were always jealous of me, Gwen, even when we were kids." Gwen looked right back at her and said, "And there she is." 3 words. The whole room understood exactly what they were seeing. Not the woman who volunteers and brings casseroles and touches your arm. The one who goes for the throat the second she's cornered. The one who turns on her own sister without blinking, because that's all she has left when the performance stops working. The church couple sat completely still, looking at Loretta like they had never seen her before. The woman who had sat next to them at Sunday service and organized potlucks was standing in front of them with a face they didn't recognize. Philip pushed his chair back. The legs scraped against the floor, and the sound made one of the church women jump. He stood up and said barely above a whisper, "Who are you?" Loretta didn't cry. She didn't reach for any of the tools that had gotten her through 3 marriages and decades of hiding in plain sight. She had no script, no audience willing to believe her. She looked around that table and every face was turned away. She reached for her wine glass, held it for a second, then set it back down gently, like it was the last thing in the room she could control. Then she turned and walked out of her own dining room without saying a word. No tears, no speech, no performance. Just walked through the doorway, and a few seconds later I heard a door close somewhere deeper in the house. Vernon was sitting in his chair with his hands flat on the table. He had watched his mother walk out and hadn't moved. He hadn't gone after her. For the first time in 9 years, he had stayed in his seat while Loretta left the room. He looked at me. His eyes were wet and his face was tight, and he said quietly, "I should have believed you." I looked at him for a long time. I thought about every night I cried in bed next to him, every conversation where he told me his mother was just difficult, every time he chose her comfort over mine and called it keeping the peace. I said, "Yeah, you should have." I sat back down. My legs felt weak for the first time all night. Brooke reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were still shaking, but her grip was strong, and I held on right back. Philip was still standing, staring at the empty doorway where his wife had disappeared. Nobody said anything for a long time. Nobody got up. Nobody went to find Loretta. Nobody followed her down the hallway to tell her everything was okay, or that she should come back and let everyone work it out. For the first time in 9 years, nobody followed her off the stage.